शुरू कर दिया सामने।
Okay, we'll begin with questions. Are there questions?
Yeah, sir.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So I have a couple of them. First, this m mu nu tau that we have derived for special theory of for Lorentz symmetry.
Yes.
Earlier, before let's say we forget about Lorentz symmetry and Einstein. So even then we should be able to write theories with Galilean transformations of symmetry.
Okay.
So like at that time, did people used to call those as mu nu tau as the angular momentum density part?
Well, you didn't really have. You are asking whether people used to call. No, they wouldn't have called those angular momentum before the unification of time and space, right? Because they would have been different concept quantities altogether.
Yeah.
Right. So they became combined into one set of tensor concept charges only after you have special relativity. You still had rotation generators, of course. Rotation was very much there.
Yeah. Okay. Also, it's on the onset the Lorentz symmetry and translation symmetry are completely independent.
Yes, that's right.
So it is possible to have theories which have complete Lorentz symmetry but have none of translational symmetry. Like it can be broken in some directions.
Yeah, it can be possible. Yes, exactly.
So in that case, we should be able to define some m mu nu tau without even having t mu nu conserved.
True. Yes.
But shouldn't the form be different then? Like,
well, see, we derived this. Let's see. The general form of m unity we got here, right?
yeah.
Then for the specific case of scalar fields, okay, we said that it can be written in this form.
Okay.
If d mu nu was not defined to begin with, right, you can still define conserved currents, right? But they will not be writable in terms of t mu nu because you have not even defined t mu nu, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So certainly this form requires, I mean, in fact, as you will see that this form is also not universal. This form requires, first of all, that you have to have a translation invariance so that you can define t mu nu. Right? And we'll see that this form holds only for the scalars, right? Otherwise, there are corrections to this formula.
Okay.
Yeah. So the angular, angular momentum conserved charges, right? Which they of course exist if you have Lorentz invariance, right? And if you have translation invariance. I mean, you can try. I mean, take a Lagrangian which has explicit x square.
Okay. Yeah.
X square is Lorentz invariant, but it's not translation invariant. Right, and you can construct the corresponding conserved currents and the conserved quantities.
Okay. Also, one last thing. In the Schrodinger case, like even in the problem set 1 that you gave, we had some operator corresponding to the position operator.
Yes.
So, like by that sort of a correspondence, we should be able to write that sort of an operator in any such field theory. But like in books or something, like Shrednecki also points out that if we are to write some relativistic consistent theory, we should disregard the notion of position being an operator as long as we are not also considering time as an operator.
Yeah. Okay. The point is you can do it in a free field theory particularly, right? I mean, we have the momentum eigenstates, right?
Yeah.
Now you can use the same formula that expresses the position eigenstates in terms of momentum eigenstates or the momentum operator, and you can construct a formal position operator. It's just not very useful.
Yeah, but it's not like the construction itself is difficult or something.
No, you can just follow the same. I mean, after all, the position operator would have been written there in terms of A and A dagger, right?
Yeah.
You use the same formula, except that A and A dagger will now refer to the A and A dagger of Klein-Gordon theory, for example.
Yeah.
It will not be a local operator like in the other case. Okay, but you can define position operator at least for free fields formally that way.
What is the issue with interactions? Like you are saying we can define so for free fields, but
well, the point is this position operator, I mean, is not useful in the because it's not local, right? What you will find is when you try to express this in terms of the fields, it depends on fields at all points.
As a Fourier transform or something?
Yeah, as a Fourier transform, exactly.
Okay.
So that's the issue, that it's not very useful because it's not a local operator.
All right.
Sir,
Yes.
when we are we have derived all the symmetries in position basis. So we could do a Fourier transform and go into the momentum basis and do the same prescription there to find the symmetries.
Yeah, you could certainly do that. Right? Except that in time you don't want to take Fourier transform because time in quantum field theory we are still, as of now, we are still treating differently, right?
Yeah.
But in the space part, you can certainly take a Fourier transform and discuss the symmetries.
Yeah. Actually, the thing is, we demand that the fields decay at infinity. So would it hold in the momentum basis?
Well, it will not be in that form, right? If you see it will be basically put a constant on how the fields behave at t equal to 0. Because the decay of fields at infinity, right, it controls the possible singularities at p equal to 0.
Okay.
So the condition will come out differently, but physically it will be the same condition. If, for example, the fields are allowed to become singular at p equal to 0, right, which will happen if the fields don't decay at infinity, right, their Fourier transforms, right, as momentum goes to 0, will have singularities. Is that point clear? I mean, Gaussian, for example, if the fields decay Gaussian as a Gaussian, then the momentum space also it decays as a Gaussian, and it's a perfectly smooth function at p equal to 0. But fields which are non-zero at infinity could give rise to delta function, for example, on a Fourier transform, or even worse singularities. So you have to guard against those in momentum space.
And also, when we are deriving these symmetries and we raise it to quantum operators, that won't be unique, right? Let's say we have a conserved charge that is a product of some operators and not operators, and we raise let's say the physical quantities, and these physical quantities as a product form an operator in quantum field theory. So we should be worrying about whether the way we have defined this product remains conserved in quantum field theory.
Yes, certainly we should worry about it, right? But this problem, in fact, is there even in quantum mechanics, right? The operator ordering problem. In fact, given a classical theory, what one can show is that there is no unique quantization in general, because if you make a canonical transformation and quantize, you'll get a different quantum theory in general. Okay, precisely because of this problem. That suppose you postulate some QP commutator. Okay, under a canonical transformation, Q goes to some function of Q and P, and P goes to some other function of P, Q and P. To leading order in H bar, the commutators go over to Poisson brackets. But then, because they are arbitrary polynomials, in general, the subleading order in H bar, let's say H bar square terms, will not match. So you have to first fix a procedure for quantization. And in that procedure for quantization, typically there is a unique choice of the conserved operators, okay, which you have to work to figure out. Sometimes you find that it is not conserved, right? There is no choice for which the quantum operator is conserved, and those are the cases where we call the theory anomalous. That those symmetries are anomalous, that they are not actually conserved in the quantum theory.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to certainly make a judicious choice in quantum theory. Once you have fixed your quantization procedure, you have to make a judicious choice in the quantum theory as to which operator is actually conserved. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Are there other questions?
Sir,
Yes.
sir, regarding the first problem and the third problem set, sir, is there any real physical system for describing which we need to go to derivatives of order higher than 2?
Yes, meaning, okay, it depends on what exactly you mean by physical system. Normal quantum field theories that describe particle physics don't have that kind of action or Lagrangian. But certainly when you start including gravitational theories, there are examples where there are terms in there are Lagrangians with hard derivatives in fields. But if you in particle physics, normally you don't encounter theories of that kind. At least the theories that have been considered so far all have this property that it's a integral of a Lagrangian density which depends on the field and its first derivative.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay. Any other question?
Sir,
Yes.
so last time you said about hydrogen atom having a bigger symmetry than SO3. So
Yes.
is that SO3 cross SU2 or something else?
I think no, not SO3 terms. I think this enhances SO4. Okay, SO4 you can think of as SU2 times SU2, right? So in that sense, locally it is SU2 times SU2, but it's more natural to think of this as SO4.
Oh, okay. So
you don't see it at the Lagrangian level.
Oh, okay. So one SU2 comes from the spin and another comes from the orbital angular momentum.
No. It's not that. Because once you read, it's not that symmetry, right? That's a trivial symmetry which is easily visible, right?
Yes.
Even if we ignore spin, normally when you first solve the hydrogen atom problem in quantum mechanics, there is no spin, right? You talk about just a scalar moving in the Coulomb potential. But that theory, when you actually calculate the energy levels, you find that there is a lot more degeneracy than what rotational symmetry would have given you, right? Because if you introduce the principal quantum number and angular momentum quantum number, n and L, the energy depends only on the combination n plus L. Okay, whereas just based on the symmetry, you should have allowed arbitrary dependence on n and L. Okay, and indeed, the general rotational invariant quantum system will have dependence on both n and L, and not just the combination n plus L. But this you can explain why the hydrogen atom spectrum depends on n plus L by invoking this bigger symmetry.
Oh, okay. So in general, we can look at the spectrum of any system and then we can figure out the symmetry.
Yeah. Okay. If you knew the spectrum, right? Sometimes it will be accidental. Suppose some things are degenerate, some are not. Okay? So it's not that by just by looking at the degeneracy of the spectrum, we can infer what the symmetry is. Okay? It may only give you a clue that maybe there is a bigger symmetry that you have not understood because there is this additional degeneracy. But that doesn't mean that it's easy to find that symmetry. In particular, in the case of hydrogen atom, the extra SO4 symmetry is highly non-trivial. Okay? It's not easy to see that it's actually a symmetry of the theory.
Okay, so is there any material where I can find this?
Yeah, I think if you, I'll try to find a reference and let you know, or if you search on the net symmetries of the hydrogen atom problem, you will probably find the reference. Okay? But I'll try to send you the reference.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Any other question? Okay, so let me then begin. Okay. So let me review what we have done so far, okay, in terms of rotational invariance. So what we considered last time was Lorentz invariance of the Klein-Gordon action. Okay. And what we said is that the Klein-Gordon action is invariant under a symmetry transformation of this kind. Okay. And what we mean by invariance there, okay, what we found in that case in particular, that when you replace in the argument of the Lagrangian phi by phi tilde, then the Lagrangian becomes, it comes back to the original Lagrangian, but with phi replaced by phi of x prime, and the phi of x, and the derivative of phi replaced by the derivative del prime of phi of x prime. So let me just point out that this is something that you have to discover. Then you have to check if this relation is true or not. This is needed for the action to be invariant. Okay, because now if you integrate over d4x and use the fact that the d4x is the same as d4x prime, then the action will be the same. Action evaluated for phi tilde and action evaluated for phi will be the same. So this is something that is up to you to choose. If you make the wrong choice, you will not find that this relation holds. But once you have chosen this, then you have to go ahead and verify that this is true. Right? This is not a choice anymore. So here x prime is lambda times x. Okay, that's this one. And in components, x prime mu is lambda mu nu x nu. So this works for, and lambda is a Lorentz transformation matrix. So this works for general Lorentz transformation. But then for looking for conserved quantities, we looked at the infinitesimal version, where we took lambda as identity matrix times epsilon times omega, where omega, epsilon is an infinitesimal parameter. And this matrix omega, what we found is that once you demand that lambda satisfies the Lorentz transformation property, namely lambda eta lambda transpose is eta, then that translates to this following condition on omega, that if you define this object omega rho nu, where you have raised the index or lowered the index, the first index, okay, or raised the second index, okay, then it gives an antisymmetric matrix. So the condition that this is a Lorentz transformation matrix translates to this omega rho nu with both indices lowered being an antisymmetric matrix. And then you went ahead and constructed the conserved quantity associated with this symmetry, or conserved current associated with this symmetry by Noether procedure, and we found this result. Here T mu nu is the energy momentum tensor of the Klein-Gordon field that we have defined earlier. Are there questions up to this point? This is clear. This is what we have done last time. And now let me also add something more, that it's easy to see by following the same derivation that we did last time, that when you have more fields and more general L, then as long as this is true, that imagine that we replace all the fields phi r by phi tilde r, where phi tilde r is defined as phi r of lambda x, and suppose that under this replacement L satisfies this, then that means that action is invariant, because if you now integrate over d4x, you get integral d4x prime L. Okay, that's the same as the original action. Then the same formula works, because if you look at the derivation that we have given, right, we didn't really need the explicit form of L. What we did need, of course, is this relation, right? So this is something you have to check. There may be L's, okay, which does not satisfy this, okay, in which case it is not true. But as long as L satisfies this, and as long as the transformation law of the fields are of this form, then the conserved quantity associated with this Lorentz symmetry is given by this. And then, of course, you can, because it's antisymmetric and this is manifestly antisymmetric, okay, this basically means that this itself is conserved. Okay, are there questions? One thing should be clear, that here, to begin with, you had just gotten this term, right? If you had just taken this, right, then you cannot claim that x nu t mu tau is conserved. And the reason is that the symmetric part of this, x nu t mu tau plus x mu t nu tau, when you contract with omega, gives you 0 anyway. Okay? So the symmetric part of this is not conserved in general, because that is 0 by simple contraction. Antisymmetric part, okay, is conserved, because once you have antisymmetrized, right, then by choosing different omegas, okay, you can just pick up different components. components. For fixed mu, we can pick up different components, nu and tau, and each of them are conserved by themselves. So if this is okay, I'll proceed to the next step. So the next step will be to consider a more general class of theories. So here again, we start with the field theory of multiple fields, which I'll denote by phi 1 to phi n. But now we will not demand that phi is transformed in this simple way that we had here. Now, what we mean by we don't demand, right, is the following. That you can always say that, okay, we declare that the phi is transformed this way, right? Because it's up to you to declare how the fields transform. But what we may find that if we declare it this way, that the Lagrangian may be such or the action may be such that this condition doesn't hold. Then you may declare the symmetry to be this, okay, but it doesn't help because the Lagrangian is not the same or the action is not the same. So it's not a symmetry. So here we are considering a case where in order to keep the Lagrangian the same or the action the same.
Hello.
Yes, right, please.
Sir, I just want to ask, sir, are we considering that the multiple fields at the same position? Like multiple field means, I don't
Okay,
understand.
see, each field is a function, right?
Okay.
So when you say phi 1, right, it means the whole function phi 1. So multiple fields mean there are several scalar fields, right? I mean, you could have added in two Klein-Gordon action, right, with phi 1 and phi 2. So multiple fields simply means that you have more than one field, right? A field itself is just a whole function, right? So specifying a field means you have to specify the function at all points in space and time, right? That's what the information about the field is. It is in this sense that we are considering a multiple field, that means multiple functions of space and time.
Okay, sir.
Is this clear? Because in order to test whether the action is invariant, right? Action involves an integral, right? So if you just know the value of the field at one particular point, you may not know if the action is invariant or not. You have to start a whole set of functions, look at the new set of functions, phi 1 tilde to phi n tilde, and then check if the action remains the same when you replace the phi's by phi tildes.
Sir, for each field, we obtain the action invariant.
No. See, in general, you cannot say that for each field the action will be invariant because the action may contain terms that involve product of the fields, right? So it's not that the action is a sum of action for each of the fields. You can have a term like phi 1, phi 2 in the action. Integral of d4x, phi 1x, phi 2x. There, if you just say that phi 1 changes and phi 2 doesn't change, that's not a symmetry.
Okay,
so
sir.
when you're talking about a symmetry, you have to look at the whole collection, right? And you have to say how each field transforms, and then check if the action is invariant when each field transforms in the way you have chosen. Is that point clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Any other question? Okay. So what we are going to do, okay, is to suggest that we have a more general version of Lorentz transformation law. Okay. This is forced on us in order that it's a symmetry of the action, right? Imagine that you had just chosen this transformation law, okay, and you find that it's not a symmetry of the action. Okay. Then you want to try more general transformation, right, and see if it can somehow be a symmetry of the action. Okay. And we'll see later that there are fields, okay, which do not transform like scalars, which do not transform this way, okay, but they transform in a more general way, okay, which is given here. Okay. So here SRS is a matrix that depends on lambda, okay, and we have taken the sum from 1 to n, okay, because there are n fields. We are assuming that there are n fields, so in general we are allowing arbitrary matrix multiplying the fields. Arbitrary linear combination of the fields. Now you may ask why linear combination, right? You could have taken phi s square or phi s cube, Of course, you can try all of those, okay? But in physics, most of the time, the kind of fields that we encounter, okay, transform into linear combinations of each other. Okay? And this is the most general way of representing transformation of fields that go into linear combinations of each other. So we'll assume that SRS is a set of matrices, okay, which of course depend on lambda, because lambda is the Lorentz transformation. This is what tells us what Lorentz transformation you are using. Okay? And we postulate a transformation like this. Is this clear? So we postulate that a transformation like this leaves the action invariant, and more precisely, it gives the same property of the Lagrangian. Okay. So if this property holds, we say the Lagrangian transforms as a scalar, okay, because as far as the Lagrangian is concerned, it's as if we replace the fields by their transformed values, okay, and the Lagrangian that just became the field evaluated at a new point, lambda times x. Right? X prime is lambda times x, okay, which is what would have happened for a scalar field, for example, right? Phi tilde r is phi r of x prime, because x prime is defined as lambda times x. Okay. Here for scalar field, Lagrangian transform like this. Okay. And we are now saying that let's suppose that the fields transform in a more complicated way, but the Lagrangian still transforms in this way. Okay. And we'll see examples of this later. Okay. So for example, you could imagine that the phi r represents the components of a Lorentz vector. Okay. This is a vector potential mu that we encounter in electrodynamics. Okay. And we'll see when we discuss Maxwell's action that the transformation that leaves the Maxwell's action invariant, okay, is not mu tilde of x is equal to mu of lambda x, okay, but you have a matrix multiplying it. Okay, and the matrix in that case is simply lambda, okay, or more precisely lambda transpose, because if you look at the contraction, right, is the row index of this that is equated to the column index of A, and then summed over. Sorry, yeah, it's a row index, and this you can think of either as a column index or a row index, because it's a one-dimensional object. Okay. But in terms of S, right, what if you compare this general form with this one, it tells us that S mu nu, if we only had a vector field, then S mu nu is given by lambda nu mu, okay, because of this. Or in terms of matrices, you can say S is lambda transpose. Is this clear? So this is what I claim, okay, what we'll see later is what is required. This is the transformation that is required to leave the Maxwell's action invariant. Okay. And now we are simply comparing this with this general form that we have proposed here. Okay. Phi r, so r here is mu, right? S here is nu. Okay. So phi mu would have been S mu nu phi nu. Okay. So S mu nu is this lambda nu mu, right? And in components, that means in terms of matrices, I'm calling S is equal to lambda transpose. And as I've already said, we'll check later that this is a symmetry of the Maxwell's action. So let's take another example. So let's suppose that phi is a that we have 5 fields, okay, and it involves a scalar field phi and a vector field mu. In that case, for the scalar, this matrix is trivial. There is no matrix, right? It's just phi tilde of x is equal to phi of lambda x. Whereas for a vector, you will have this form. For a vector, the transformation law will be like this. So then we can say that the S will be a block diagonal 5 by 5 matrix. Okay, 5 by 5 because it's a 5. There are 5 fields, right? 1 here and 4 here. But as far as the transformation goes, S will be block diagonal. So for the scalar part, it's just 1. Okay. And for the vector part, we have seen that it's lambda transpose, which is here. Okay. And as I said, we'll assume that under this transformation that is given here, L still transforms as a scalar. Okay. This is of course something that you have to check, right? Somebody has given you a Lagrangian, you have to check if L, that once you have proposed those transformation laws, where L actually transforms like this. Okay. So you assume that this is the case, okay, and then we'll proceed from there. Are there questions? And I should just add that for a vector field, it's, I mean, S is easy to find because you know by experience how S should transform, how a vector field should transform under Lorentz transformation. But this is not always going to be the case. In particular, when you look at the Dirac equation, for example, or the Dirac action, it's not at all obvious by looking at the action what S should be. We'll see that there is an S, which is a complicated function of lambda, but it's certainly not easy to see just by looking at the action. Whereas for the Maxwell's field or for the vector field, we know this, or you can guess this because you are already familiar with how a vector should transform under Lorentz transformation. But we'll always assume that there is some matrix S under which the fields transform this way.
Sir?
Yes, go ahead.
So if we can say that our transformation matrix S is diagonal, then probably we can say that our theory is scalar, or the fields transform like a scalar, if S is diagonal.
Well, if S is diagonal for all lambda,
Yes.
then we can easily check that it's all one.
Okay.
And then of course it's scalar.
Okay.
So if S is identity matrix, right?
Yes, yes.
N by N identity matrix, then indeed you can say that it's an N scalars that
Okay.
are there in the theory. Any other question?
Sir, so the usual procedure is that we start with the action and then find out the S for the field.
Yes, exactly. We try to guess what S is, right? So that the action is invariant.
Okay.
Okay. But I mean, there's no guarantee that you'll always be able to find an S. If the action
Okay.
describes what we see in nature, right? In nature, we know the Lorentz invariance is a symmetry. So it better be that there is an S which has this property. But if somebody gives you an arbitrary Lagrangian or arbitrary action, then there may not be such an S because that action may not be Lorentz invariant.
Okay. And this, okay. Okay.
Is this clear?
Yes.
Any other question?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, actually, that S of lambda, how can we find that for a number of fields that is more than 5? Like one scalar and 5 other fields. Then that S mu runs from more than 0 to 3, right?
Yes, it runs over 6 values, for example. Right?
So
It could be,
But
for
then
example, 2 scalars and 1 vector, right?
yes.
Right. So, but suppose that somebody gives you 8. It could be 4
Yes.
scalars and 1 vector, or 8 scalars or 2 vectors. Right. So you have to figure out what it is by looking at the action. See, if you don't have the action, then of course it's completely up to you to decide how they transform, right? Because there's nothing to check. But once somebody gives an action written in terms of the fields, you have to try to find out an S which leaves the action invariant.
Yes, but that then S mu will be different if we change the number of fields.
Yes, of course S will be different. Yes. Right? Because S is an N by N matrix, right?
Yes.
So obviously S depends on the number of fields. Right? As you change N, S is even the rank of the matrix goes up, right?
Yes.
Sir, and if we want to find out the S for a given action, then we have to assume some form of the S.
Yes.
And then put it into the action and then check.
Yes. But as you will see that, I mean, it's not completely arbitrary. I mean, you already know some structure that S has. Okay. But if you didn't know anything about Lorentz symmetry or anything about Lorentz group, then yes, you have to try different S's. Or you assume that you take some arbitrary form of S, right? Then substitute in the action, and then try to find S, put restrictions on S so that the various terms cancel. Okay, between the new action and the old action.
Okay, so the arbitrary S that we will put is what, like something like a polynomial or Taylor series in lambda.
Okay,
Something.
I mean, you could put anything to begin with, right? But of course, we will see that it's not completely arbitrary because there are structures based on group theory and so on. Right? But if you didn't do anything, yes, you have to put arbitrary polynomials, right? So if you have a totally unknown symmetry, then it's best to start with infinitesimal portion first.
Oh, okay.
Because then you don't have to worry about higher parts. You look at the number of infinitesimal transformation parameters, right? In this case, it will be 6. And try to find that symmetry first. And then you try to build a finite transformation from there.
Okay.
Any other question?
Sir,
Yes.
sir, is it not necessarily that the function of fields contain a scalar field and also vector field? It may be a purely vector also, we can write.
Yes, you can be purely vector, right?
Okay, sir.
Maxwell's theory, for example, is purely vector, right?
Okay, sir.
So there's no restriction on how many fields of what kind you have. This is a general n by n matrix that would start with. If it could be 10 fields, which may have mixture of scalars, vectors, other things.
Okay, sir.
Any other question? Okay, so here is the transformation law. Okay, I have written again. Now, before we go ahead and try to see its consequence, okay, in particular for conserved charge, okay, let's try to study some restriction on S, right? What kind of property S should have. Okay. So for this, let's suppose that we make another Lorentz transformation, okay, and the new Lorentz transformation has Lorentz matrix lambda prime. Okay, so lambda prime is a new matrix which also satisfies lambda prime eta lambda prime transpose equal to eta. Okay. And let's ask what we will do to these transformed fields phi tilde r. Okay. So clearly this will transform the field configuration phi tilde r to a new configuration, and let's call this phi hat r. So here is the expression for phi hat r that I have given. So all I have done here is that I have used the same transformation except that I have replaced lambda by lambda prime, okay, and the phi which was there on this side, okay, I have replaced by phi tilde because you are trying to transform phi tilde to phi hat. Now we are going to substitute, okay, phi tilde you already know what it is in terms of phi. We are going to simply substitute. Okay. So that's easy. All you have to do is that in here the argument was x, here the argument is lambda prime x. Okay. So you have to replace x by lambda prime x, right here. So you'll get lambda times lambda prime x, right? That's what I have written here. Okay. And because this index is s now, right? The summation index will be something else. I've called that t. Okay. So this becomes st, okay, and lambda has been replaced by lambda prime. Okay. Sorry, this is lambda itself, okay, because this was the original phi tilde phi relation. So that's what I've done here. Okay. So look at this. So here r has been replaced by s, so that's why it's s. Okay. The summation index I'm taking to be t. Okay. Lambda remains as it is, okay, because we are just using this relation. And in the argument of phi, it was lambda times x, okay, but x has been replaced by lambda prime x, so I get phi t of lambda lambda prime x. So is this step clear? Any question about this step? Okay, so let me proceed. So in the next step, I note that here you have a product SRS SST. Okay. So the column index of this is equated to the row index of this and summed over, right? Because you have a sum over S. So you perform the sum over S first, okay, and I can now write this as the product, as a matrix product, S of lambda prime, S of lambda. And what are the components? Which component is it? The row index is R, okay, and the column index is T. Okay, S has been summed over already. Okay. And this remains phi T of lambda lambda prime X. This is clear to everybody? Okay, this is just a rewriting of this.
Sir, please repeat this second
Okay.
line.
So I have this sum over here, right? Okay. Here all I'm saying is that let's do the sum over S first. Okay. Then what do you get? S RS of lambda prime and S ST of lambda. That's like the matrix product, right? When you take the product of two matrices, you take the column index of the first matrix, equate it to the say, row index of the second matrix, and then sum. Okay. So the sum over S, okay, basically gives you S of lambda prime times S of lambda. Okay, that's this. Okay. And it's the RT component of that matrix because the column row index is R and the column index is T. Okay. This has remained as it is.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Is this clear? So I'm just reinterpreting the sum over S here as a matrix product. Okay, that's what I have written here. This is the same as this. Okay. And in the last step, I have just relabeled T by S. Okay, this is nothing because S is sum, T is summed over anyway, so I have just replaced T by S. So is this point clear? Okay. So let me proceed. So now look at this. Okay. So what we have done physically is that we have first applied a Lorentz transformation by lambda prime, then by lambda. Okay. Lambda lambda prime. Okay. Or the other way depends on whether you look at it passively or actively. Okay. But from this it's clear that what this phi hat and phi relation should be, okay, is a Lorentz transformation with Lorentz matrix lambda lambda prime. So this should have been the correct relation. Okay. That we simply make a Lorentz transformation with the Lorentz transformation matrix lambda lambda prime, right? Because X has gotten changed to lambda lambda prime X. Okay. And if lambda is a Lorentz transformation matrix, lambda prime is a Lorentz transformation matrix, then this product is also a Lorentz transformation matrix. Okay. So this would have been the correct transformation law for phi. Okay. And that means that this must be equal to this. So you equate these two, and that gives the matrix relation that S of lambda prime S of lambda must be equal to S of lambda lambda prime. So is this point clear to everybody? Please ask if this is not clear because this is going to be important. So what we are saying here is that S, we started by saying that S is an arbitrary matrix. But we see from this analysis that S cannot be totally arbitrary. It has to satisfy certain constraints. That if you make one Lorentz transformation after the other, the result better look like a Lorentz transformation again. And that requires that the product of the S's should be given by a new S, whose argument is now the product of the lambdas. And that's what this relation tells us.
Sir,
Go ahead, please.
sir, in the first line where you have written phi cap R is equals to this summed over S times phi tilde.
Oh, this one?
No, sir, below.
Below, okay. This line, right?
No, sir, here the first line.
Here?
Yeah, sir, this line. Sir, here we have phi tilde S of lambda prime S.
Lambda
X.
prime X, yes.
Yeah, lambda prime X. So X transforms to lambda X, right?
Okay, see, look at the X, the way we are thinking of this, right? This gives you phi tilde as a function of X, right?
Yes.
Okay. This is valid for all X. Okay.
Yes.
Now we are trying to evaluate phi tilde S at lambda prime X, right? So what you have to do is that in this expression, I just substitute X by lambda prime X.
Yes.
right? You are thinking of this as being lambda prime lambda x. Is that?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. I
but
was.
yeah, but if you just look at this relation, right, we are just simply making use of this relation, replacing x by lambda prime x.
Okay. 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 Okay, sir. I understand. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Fine.
So this can sometimes be confusing if you think in terms of physically, right? Because there is this difference between active and passive transformation. But if you think of this mathematically, what's happening, then I think there is no confusion, right? All you are saying is that this is true for all x. So it must be true if we replace x by lambda prime x. And that's what we are doing here. Are there other questions? So this formula I hope is clear to everybody, that this is a condition that S has to satisfy just for consistency. Okay. Now this is looks a little unsatisfactory in the sense that here the S of lambda comes first, then S of lambda prime. Here lambda prime comes first, then lambda. Okay. But this you can rectify by simply taking the transpose. Okay. So if you take the transpose of this, so ST basically means that is the transpose of the matrix S of lambda. Okay. So if you take the product of two matrices and take the transpose, then the transpose comes in the opposite order, right? Transpose of AB is B transpose A transpose. Okay. So that's what I have used here. So by taking the transpose of this, I can write this equation as S lambda transpose, which is I'm writing as ST of lambda times ST of lambda prime is ST of lambda lambda prime. This of course is an argument, right? This is not getting transpose. Okay, the matrix S is getting transpose. And so from this we see that the composition law of ST is the same as the composition law of lambda, right? Because here lambda prime and lambda prime comes first, then lambda. What it is saying is that if you calculate the matrix, if you look at the matrix S transpose, okay, then in the argument, if you have a product, okay, then it's given by the product of the corresponding S's. Okay. So whether you take the product of the lambda prime lambdas first, and then find S transpose, or whether you take the S transpose first, S transpose of lambda first, and then take the product, it gives the same result. Okay. And this has a name. Okay, if any matrix S that satisfies an equation of this kind, okay, is called that S3 is given. It gives a representation of the Lorentz group. So if you have gone through a course in group theory, then probably it's familiar to you. Okay. If you have not gone through a course in group theory, then you can just take this as a definition, right? We call S transpose a representation of the Lorentz group, okay, if it satisfies this property. Okay. And this, of course, has to hold for any choice of lambda and lambda prime. Okay, any Lorentz transformation matrices.
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
could you please repeat the previous part? Because one thing is confusing that first you are applying lambda, then you are applying lambda prime.
Yes.
So how can we get the combination like lambda prime kind of thing?
So you are confused about this step?
Phi cap are firstly
Above.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't get the last part. Phi t lambda prime x. The last term.
Yes.
Okay. So you are applying lambda on x first. Then you are applying lambda prime. So how can we get the combination?
That this is what it is. Okay, let's go through it again. Okay.
Yes.
So this part you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. Now all I am saying is that you have this relation between phi tilde and phi, right?
Okay.
This is true for any x.
Yes.
Just replace x by lambda prime x on both sides.
Fine.
That's this relation. So this you agree? I have replaced in the argument of here, right? Lambda prime x, right? So I have just replaced x by lambda prime x here. So phi r tilde of lambda prime x will be phi s of lambda times lambda prime x.
Okay. In this way, this is fine. But if we think like that, first we are doing some transformation by lambda, then we are doing our next transformation by lambda prime. then it's a little bit.
Yeah, so it's little confusing because of this. As I said, it's a difference between active and passive transformation. Okay, the compositions are different, okay. But the algebra should be clear.
Yes, that's true.
Right.
That's clear. Yeah. Okay.
And that's what we are saying here. Okay,
Yeah,
in the way we are defining our transformation, this is what we get.
Okay.
Okay, not lambda prime. I mean, call this y. I mean, this should hold for any x, right? So call this y. So phi r tilde of y is phi s of lambda y. And now all I'm saying is that let's substitute y equal to lambda prime x on both sides, right? Because that's what we want.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Are there questions?
So, sir, like depending on the value of small n, so that will be the dimension of the representation of the Lorentz group.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
Okay. Any other question about this formula? Okay. So let's try to verify this in known cases. Okay, we have already seen. So for the scalar, S is just identity, right? Because scalar doesn't have a matrix multiplying it. Okay. So if you have a single scalar, it's like 1. S is 1. Okay, 1 by 1 matrix. In that case, it's trivial because all of these are 1, right? So 1 times 1 is equal to 1. Okay, so S transpose times S transpose lambda times S transpose lambda prime is 1 because it's 1 times 1. And S transpose of lambda prime is also. For the vector, we had found S earlier. Let me remind you by this comparison over here. Right? By this comparison over here, we had found that S is lambda transpose, right? So with this, we have S is lambda transpose and S of lambda prime will be lambda prime transpose. Right? Because we just substitute the argument lambda by lambda prime. So let's now calculate the left hand side and the right hand side. So left hand side is S transpose of lambda, S transpose of lambda prime. So this is lambda transpose. Sorry, S transpose of lambda is lambda, right? Because S of lambda is lambda transpose. So S transpose is lambda. So this is lambda. This is lambda prime. So you get lambda prime on this side. And S transpose of lambda prime. You take S transpose of lambda is lambda, and then instead of lambda, you just use lambda prime. So S transpose of lambda prime is also lambda prime. And we see that these two are equal. Is this clear? So at least we see that in our convention, we are internally consistent. Because if, for example, here we had lambda prime lambda. Okay, let's imagine that. I think where many people have expressed opinion that this should have been lambda prime lambda. Okay. Then here you will get S lambda prime times S lambda is equal to S lambda prime lambda, right? Okay. Then you didn't have to take the transpose. Okay. S itself should have satisfied this property. Should have been a representation. S of lambda prime, S of lambda is S of lambda prime lambda. Okay. But that would fail for the vector, right? Because if we apply this not on S transpose but on S, okay, this relation, if S satisfies this relation, okay, then here you have lambda prime transpose, okay, and on this side you have lambda prime transpose, and those are not equal. Right? Lambda transpose times lambda prime transpose is not lambda prime transpose, right? It's lambda prime transpose. Okay. So unless we had this transpose in the relation, it would fail for the vector. So the convention that we have used so far is mutually consistent at least. Okay. We need the transpose so that the relation holds for the vector.
Sir?
Yes, go ahead please.
Sir, can I say it this way that a vector or a tensor transforms in a way that S is some lambda transpose or a product of lambda transpose? that's why we choose this convention to be consistent with this KSF vector. I mean the S
Well, you
relation.
can think of it that way, right? But see, okay, I mean, if this is confusing, what I could have done from the beginning, that I could have written this as S of SR, right?
Yes.
Then there will be no confusion. Then it will not be transposed. Right? Then whatever, wherever you have a S appearing, it will be replaced by S transpose, right?
Yes.
So you could have said that would have been more natural, maybe, because the vectors transform this way, right? That would have been more natural. Or you could have said that instead of writing it this way, I could have taken lambda transpose as a Lorentz transversal matrix, as a definition of what we mean by Lorentz transversal matrix. So that would also have resolved this issue, right? So
Yes,
whatever you have done within this convention, this is what we get, right? You can always make things look the way you want by changing your convention.
right, sir.
Either take a transpose here or take a transpose here.
Okay, sir.
Is this okay? Any other question? So let me again emphasize that you shouldn't think too much of this fact that the order is getting changed or that you have to take a transpose. You could change this by taking transpose. It's just that in the way we have introduced this matrix S, this is what you get. But there is nothing deep about it. Okay, you can certainly make things look better if you think that that way is better. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I'll proceed. Okay, so our goal will be to study how the Noethern current is modified when S is not the identity matrix. Okay, because you have already found the form of the Noethern current when S is the identity matrix. And so for this, we need to study infinitesimal transformation. Okay, and see what this implies for the infinitesimal transformation. So now first notice that if you take here, for example, lambda prime is identity, then the relation is of the form S transpose of identity times S transpose of lambda is S transpose of identity times lambda. But of course, identity times lambda is lambda itself. So you get S transpose of lambda. And now you see by comparing the left hand side and the right hand side that S transpose of identity must be identity matrix itself, because these two cancel. So here the argument identity is a 4x4 matrix, identity matrix. This is n by n identity matrix, right? So even though I have written I, you should keep in mind that these are not the same i's. This is 4x4 identity because that's what appears in the argument. And this is n by n identity because that's what the rank of S is. So this says that S of I is identity transpose, which is the same as identity. So is this logic clear? So what this is telling us that the representation S, okay, or S transpose, identity matrix must go over to identity matrix. So this in turn implies by continuity that if lambda is close to the identity matrix, say infinitesimally close to identity, then S must also be infinitesimally close to identity. So let's suppose the lambda is identity plus epsilon times omega, okay, where again omega is an antisymmetric matrix. The omega is both indices, low RD is an antisymmetric matrix. Then S should also be close to identity, right? So S of I plus epsilon omega, that's the argument, should be I plus epsilon times T omega, where T is some n by n matrix. So is this logic clear? So what we are saying is that if the argument is close to identity matrix, then S itself should be close to identity matrix, and that's what this relation reflects. Okay. Then there must be some T, which of course will be a function of the omegas, such that S of I plus epsilon omega is identity matrix plus epsilon times T omega. So T is n by n matrix, so the TRS, the components of TRS, must be a function of the 6 variables omega mu nu, right? Because as we have already discussed last time, that there are 6 independent omegas because omega is antisymmetric. So 4x4 antisymmetric matrix has 6 independent components. So now let's try to study what will be the implication of this relation over here. S of lambda prime is S of lambda prime lambda. Now let's substitute for lambda I plus epsilon omega, and for lambda prime I plus epsilon omega prime on both sides. So on this side you have this, on the right hand side you have S of I plus epsilon omega prime, I plus epsilon omega. And we will be working to first order in epsilon as usual, because epsilon we have taken to be infinitesimal. Now S of I plus epsilon omega, we have taken to be I plus epsilon t omega. Similarly, S of I plus epsilon omega prime is I plus epsilon t omega prime. Here we have this product, but we have expanded this out and kept up to terms of order epsilon. So the argument here is I plus epsilon times omega plus omega prime. And now by using this relation, we can write this as I plus epsilon times t with the argument omega plus omega prime. Because this is true for all omega, right? That's what one means by t is a function of omega. So is this step clear to everybody? Any question on this step? Okay. So let me then proceed. So this term, the left hand side, we are now going to expand out, keeping terms of order epsilon. Okay, we'll throw away terms of order epsilon square. So you get I plus epsilon t omega. Okay, that's from this cross term. And the other cross term is epsilon t omega prime times I, that's this one. Okay. This times this gives you order epsilon square, which you throw away. Okay. And on the right hand side, we keep terms as it is, I plus epsilon t omega plus omega prime. So now by comparing this, we see the I cancels, the leading term. Okay. And the coefficient of epsilon, if you equate them, we get t of omega plus t of omega prime is t of omega plus omega prime. Is this clear? Okay. So this relation that we had for finite transformation, okay, for infinitesimal transformation, it translates to this particular relation. Okay. That if we sum over t of omega and t of omega prime, we get t of omega plus omega prime. And this is true for arbitrary 4x4 antisymmetric matrices omega and omega prime. So if there are no questions on this, I'll proceed. So this I have already said, but let me say it again. So TRS is a function of the 6 variables omega mu nu. Okay. And what we have learned is that it satisfies this condition that t of omega plus t of omega prime is t of omega plus omega prime. Okay. And this has to be true for arbitrary omega and omega prime, okay, as long as they are both antisymmetric matrix. Okay. And this implies that TRS must be linear functions of the omega mu nus. Is this point clear? Linear function means that it must be linear combinations of the omega mu nus. Okay. So here I have written down the most general form. Okay. How many omega mu nus are there? 6, right? So that I have written as omega as a 6x6 4x4 antisymmetric matrix omega tau nu. Okay. And we have sum over tau and nu with some arbitrary with some coefficients which are called sigma tau nu rs. Okay. So these are just some constants. Okay. So you can certainly verify that if TRS has this form, then this relation holds automatically, because TRS of omega will be omega tau nu sigma tau nu rs. TRS of omega prime will be omega prime tau nu sigma tau nu rs. And T of omega plus omega prime will be omega plus omega prime tau nu sigma tau nu rs. So both sides are manifestly equal. But it also works the other way. If this has to be true for arbitrary choice of omega and omega prime, then TRS must be of this form. Are there questions on this? Again, this is going to be important, not just for Klein-Gordon, but for everything else that we'll be doing. So if there's any confusion at this stage, please ask.
Sir, R and S runs from 1 to small n.
1 to small n, yes.
And
Tau
tau
and
nu
nu runs
runs
from 0 to 4, 0 to 3. This is summed over, right? The repeated indices of the Lorentz type are always summed over, right?
yes, yes.
So this is already summed over from 0 to 3. Is this okay? You have any further question on this? It's clear to everybody? Okay, so with this, now we can study infinitesimal transformation of phi r. Okay. So let's go back to the transformation of phi r that we had started with, which is here. And now all I'll do is a substitute lambda equal to I plus epsilon omega. So SRS will be I plus epsilon t omega. And then I'll use the general form of t omega that we have. So this is what I have done here. This is SRS, delta RS, that's the identity matrix, plus epsilon times TRS, times phi s of I plus epsilon omega x. And now we expand this out. Again, we have to keep up to first order terms in epsilon. So there will be some term where you pick up the order epsilon term from here, in the argument. For that, you can ignore this, right? Because that will be epsilon square, so you just look at the delta RS term. But that part of phi tilde r is just how the scalars transform. Okay, so we'll not look at that. Okay, we have already studied how what is the effect of transforming as scalars. Okay? So that part will be the same as what happened to the scalars. Okay, it will involve something like a derivative of phi, for example. It will involve omega mu nu x nu times del mu phi s. Right? That's the kind of structure you will get. But that we have already seen, so let's not worry about that right now. We'll worry about the new terms that appear, and that comes because of the t. Okay. Had it been scalar, then s is identity, and then t would have been identically 0. Okay, because only the delta RS term would be there. So the new term that we get, the extra term in the expression for phi tilde r, is this one. So here I have replaced in the argument of phi s, this by 0, right? Because that will be order epsilon square. Okay, there already an epsilon sitting outside. So it's epsilon times sum over s equal to 1 to n TRS phi s of x. Are there any questions on this? Okay, so now we are going to substitute the expression for TRS that we have found, which is here. So we get epsilon times omega tau nu sigma tau nu RS times phi s. Sum over s remains as it is. Here the sum over tau and nu are implied, but I have not written it. Okay? Because any Lorentz index that we have said, any index that is repeated twice, Lorentz index, is automatically summed over. So tau is summed over and nu is summed over. It's clear?
Sir, in this capital sigma tau nu RS,
yes,
upper and lower indices don't mean anything. It's just convention.
Yes, it's just convention. See, for Lorentz index, we have tried to make sure that we only have, whenever there's a repeated index, the upper index and lower index contracts, right? Tau here and tau there, right? So that's why I've put the indices up here. Okay. For R and S, we have not followed that convention, so I have kept everything lower.
Okay, so suppose even if we write R or S in the upper row, then also the meaning would be the same.
Yeah, we will not write it that way, but yes,
Yes, yes.
okay, it's up to you to declare the meaning, right? If you write R up, okay, then you have to, I have already defined things with R lower, right? TRS. So you can define T upper RS as the same as T lower RS, and then the meaning will be the same, right? Or you can declare the T upper RS will be minus T of lower RS, in which case the meaning will be different, right? It's completely up to you. For the Lorentz index, as I said, it's convenient, okay, to have it this way. So because omega, I have used the lower index of omega, right? I have used the upper index in sigma. Okay, but these are just constants, right? So that's the way we have defined our sigma tau nu RS. Okay? But once you have defined it this way, okay, now if I want to lower the index, I'll do it in eta, right? Because that's the convention I have used, right? That we use eta to lower and up, raise indices for as far as the Lorentz indices are concerned.
Oh, so for uppering, so for lowering R and S, like, so we lower the Lorentz index by eta, and
yes,
for raising the R and S, there is no such thing.
Well, we have not declared such things, right? You could declare something, right? But we have not declared it. So you have kept everything lower.
Oh, okay, okay.
This is okay?
Yes.
Any other question? Okay, so now we are going to compare with the general definition of chi r that we had given, okay, which is phi tilde r is equal to phi r plus epsilon times chi r. And now by comparing these two, okay, we get the extra term in chi r. Okay, this term is extra. Okay, everything. Of course, chi r has many other terms, okay, but those are the same as what would have happened for a scalar, right? If phi r had been transforming as a scalar, right, where s is identity, then t is 0. You would have already gotten those terms because those terms come from changing the argument of phi. Okay. But this is a new term that you get, okay, when the fields transform not as a scalar but as a more general form, in the more general form with the transformation matrix S. And the goal now is that we will try to use this form, this extra term in chi, to calculate the extra term in the expression for the conserved current. Is that clear? So here I have said that again. So this is the extra term in chi r that you get. Extra means that it's extra because of the fact that the fields don't transform as scalars. Okay, and that's encoded in this part. Okay. So now what we are going to do is that we will recall the expression for the conserved current, J mu, for associated with this particular symmetric transformation, which is this. This is the general form. Okay. Now, what changes is chi r, right? This is the extra term in chi r. K mu doesn't change. Okay. Why doesn't K mu change? Because we have assumed, let's go back to this. See, K mu came from where? K mu came from the way the Lagrangian transform, right? Because we have to write this as a total derivative. The change in the Lagrangian, you have to write it as a total derivative. But you have assumed that the Lagrangian transforms in the same way as for the scalars. Okay. So K mu doesn't change. K mu expressed in terms of the phi r's don't change. So what changes is only the chi r, and that's what we take into account. Okay. So this gives the expression for the extra term in J mu, okay, which is here. Okay, all I have done here is that I have substituted for chi r given here. This is the extra term in chi r. Okay. So what you have to do now is that we have to add this to the earlier expression for J mu. Okay. And let me remind you that the earlier expression for J mu that we had, okay, had this structure. Okay. So total, the new expression will be the original term, which is here, plus whatever extra we got. And because in the original term we had a half, I put back a factor of 2 here, okay, so that I can put the whole thing inside a square bracket. Okay. So you get x nu t mu tau minus x tau t mu nu minus twice of this. Is this clear? So this is the new expression for the conserved current associated with Lorentz transformation. Okay. And from this we can identify m mu nu tau. Again, maybe I should have said that at the beginning when I introduced sigma. See here, when I introduced the sigma, right, I have already chosen sigma to be antisymmetric in tau and nu, because if sigma had a symmetric piece in tau and nu, it would not value, it would give a zero answer, zero contribution, right? Because omega is antisymmetric in tau and nu. So without losing any generality, I can take from the beginning sigma to be antisymmetric in tau and nu. So because of this, here the term that multiplies omega tau is automatically antisymmetric under a nu tau exchange, because this has been made antisymmetric by adding this minus sign in between, okay, by adding this extra term and putting this half. This one is already antisymmetric in tau, under tau nu exchange, because sigma I have taken to be antisymmetric under tau nu exchange. Okay. Otherwise, here you have to make sigma tau nu minus sigma nu tau, okay, which will be the same thing as picking up the antisymmetric part of sigma from the beginning. Okay. So this then shows that m mu nu tau, okay, which is defined here, is conserved. Okay. So this term that we see here in red, okay, is the relativistic generalization of the spin angular momentum. Okay. We have already seen earlier, okay, that this part, okay, at least a spatial part of this, right, xi t mu j minus xj t mu y, okay, that gives the current associated with angular momentum, the usual 3 components of the angular momentum that you are familiar with. Okay. The other 3 gave the Lorentz boost, but in relativistic theory we call the whole thing angular momentum. Okay. So this part we can call the orbital angular momentum, okay, because this is a generalization of the orbital angular momentum, okay, from the non-relativistic theories, okay, where you have only the spatial components. This part is new. Okay. This doesn't look anything like orbital angular momentum, because that should have included some x's, okay, because angular momentum is r cross p, right? This doesn't have any r in it. Okay. So this is the generalization of spin angular momentum. Okay. This is the angular momentum, intrinsic angular momentum that is carried by the field, okay, which is not part of orbital part, orbital angular momentum. Okay. And together this gives the total angular momentum. Okay. And in general, okay, what you can say is that it is a sum of the two that is conserved, okay, not orbital angular momentum by itself, nor spin angular momentum by itself. Okay. Although in simple theories, right, like free field theories, like Klein-Gordon or even free Maxwell, individually they may be conserved, but in general, it is the sum of the two that is conserved. Are there questions? I think it's probably too late to start the new subject. So I'll stop here. So if there are questions, maybe you can ask more details or more confusions.
So
Yes.
sir, sigma, tau, nu, and rs, sir, is just a constant matrix. Matlab, like.
Yes, it's a constant matrix.
Okay. Okay, sir.
It has no dependence on x or anything.
Okay, sir.
So given the fields, it's constant. So for vectors, for example, you can explicitly find out what this is. For scalars, of course, it is 0. Other questions?
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, during our rigid body lectures, you had commented that an action, if it has some internal symmetry, that corresponds to term like spin. So is it that which is happening here?
Well, for rigid body, I mean, okay, see this, I think that was not called spin. That if you have an internal symmetry, there is a new kind of conserved quantity, right? But that is no. So that is not what you will call spin really, okay? Because we have defined the conserved angular momentum associated with rotational symmetry, right? For rigid body dynamics.
Yes, sir.
That includes everything. The internal spin of the body as well as orbital motion. Because it has a R cross P term as well as the internal part. If the body has an internal symmetry, then there is a new conserved charge, but that's not really the spin. It may look like it, but it's not the spin.
Okay.
So in terms of rigid body, if you try to make connection, right, there the conserved quantity is the sum of the two. This will be like the R cross P, right, where P is the center of mass motion, and this will be everything else associated with the rigid body. And this is there even if the body doesn't have an internal symmetry.
Oh, okay. Okay, sir.
Are there other questions?
Sir,
Yes, go ahead.
so this extra term corresponding to the spin angular momentum, it totally comes from Lorentz invariance.
Yes.
So if
Lorentz invariance includes rotation,
yes,
right? Lorentz group includes rotation, yes.
so if phi s is just a scalar field.
No. Phi s is not a scalar field because if you look at, see, phi s had been scalar field, let me go back. If phi s had been scalar field, then this would have been identity.
Okay, yes.
Right? If this is identity, then T would have been 0. Let's look at the definition of T. If S is identity, then T would have been 0.
Yes.
Right? And if T is 0, then sigma would have been 0.
Yes.
So for identity, this term is, for scalar fields, this term is not there.
Okay.
Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
So this is more general, right? This, for example, for the vectors, if we take the Maxwell field, then this term is there. Okay. And this has to be accounted for if you want to calculate the total angular momentum that a Maxwell field carries. And we'll see that for the this will also be there for the Dirac field. Okay, for the Dirac field also this is a non-trivial matrix, and this term will be there even for the Dirac field. But for scalars, this is identically 0.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, we can say that phi sx is maybe a combination scalar plus vector field.
Yes. So phi could be a combination of scalar and vector field. So like a theory with one scalar and 4 Maxwell. Okay. Then the sigma will have a block diagonal form in the RS space. The scalar part will be the sigma will be identically 0. In the vector part, sigma will be non-zero.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Okay. So if you fix tau and nu, right, then sigma will be a 5 by 5 matrix, right? In the RS space, it's a 5 by 5 matrix. It will be 0 in the first 1 by 1 block, and then it will be the usual sigma for the vector field in the next 4 by 4 block.
Okay, sir.
And when you take the sum over S, the scalar field will not contribute. Only the vectors will contribute.
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
sir, does this implies that for the vector fields we have this term? I mean that for a scalar field we don't have this term, and for other fields like vector field or tensor field or multi-component field we have this term.
Yes.
So can we say that in terms of particles, that if it's this field theory is describing a vector particle, it would have a spin, and if it's describing a scalar particle, it would not have a spin?
Yes, indeed.
Quanta.
Indeed, we can. Yeah, because once you have constructed m mu nu tau, right, and you can define the conserved charge, conserved quantity by integrating m0 nu tau. Then you can apply it on a particle state, single particle state, for example, right? And what you will find is that for the single particle state, right, if it has a scalar, then only this part contributes. That can be identified as an orbital angular momentum. Whereas if it has a say a photon, right, which is associated with the Maxwell field, then besides the orbital angular momentum part, you will have an extra term that you can identify as the intrinsic spin of the photon.
It means that, sir, if we in a simple way, that if we apply this operator on a state kit, single particle state kit,
yes,
it would give a spin eigenvalue or something like that. This red term.
Yes, you can say it that way. So the easiest way to think of this is if we place the particle at the origin, where this term is absent. Okay, say suppose you are looking at the spatial part, right? The usual angular momentum, xi pj minus xj pi. So then if the particle is placed at the origin, then this term will be absent. And then this is the part that will give the spin angular momentum. The eigenvalues of this will be give the spin of the particle.
Okay. And so in this way, we can say that a scalar does not have.
Yes, exactly. So you can say a scalar doesn't have spin because this term will be vanishing for the scalar.
Sir, you said that the Dirac field have this term, but we treat Dirac as a spinor, which is a multi-component scalar field.
No, it is not a multi-component scalar field. It's a multi-component field, but it's not a vector.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
So for the Dirac field, what you will find is that this S that you have, right? It's still a 4x4 matrix. Okay, but it will not be the same S that works for the vector. If you take the Dirac action, okay, I don't know, maybe most of you have seen Dirac field because in relativistic quantum mechanics, okay, that if you take the Dirac field, right, and if you apply Lorentz transformation and thinking of this as a vector, it's not a symmetry of the equations of motion.
Yes.
It's a symmetry of the Dirac action. You have to change your S. It is possible to change S so that it remains a symmetry of the equation of motion and the Lagrangian and the action. And then what you will find is that with that new S, okay, we have new sigmas, okay, because the T's will now be different. Okay, and as a result, the sigmas will be different. Okay, and that sigma is what will appear. And this is what will be responsible for why the Dirac fields or the Dirac particle has spin half, whereas photon has spin 1. Okay, so this part is common to everybody, right? It is this part which distinguishes different particles based on their spin.
So that's why we call it a spinor field, not a vector field or something.
Exactly, yeah. Because the Lorentz transformation matrix is different for the Dirac.
It's different.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Oh.
It still has to satisfy this property, the representation property, right?
Yeah.
This property,
the representation of Lorentz.
Yeah, it has to be a representation of the Lorentz group. Okay, I mean, this has to satisfy this property. But nevertheless, it will not be simply lambda transform, which will give a vector.
Okay.
Any other question?
Sir?
Yes.
Conservation of probability in case of Dirac field or Dirac particle, or in our quantum mechanical particle, is this due to some internal symmetry of the system? I mean, the change of field due to some phase e to the power I theta kind of thing. Conservation of probability.
No, conservation of probability is not related to a symmetry. It's true in any quantum theory, right? Any consistent quantum theory. And this has to do with the fact that the Hamiltonian is a Hermitian operator. So as long as the classical Hamiltonian is real, right, the quantum Hamiltonian will be Hermitian. And that guarantees conservation of probability. But this is distinct from conservation of particle number, which in general is not true. Because in Klein-Gordon field, right? Okay, free Klein-Gordon of course conserves particle number, but we will see that once you introduce interactions, two particles can go into four particles, okay, under interaction. So particle number is not conserved. But conservation of probability is simply a statement of the Hamiltonian Hermitian. Right? So that when you go to the Schrodinger picture, where the evolution operator is to the IHT, that's unitary, and that guarantees that the norm will be conserved. So conservation of probability is not related to an internal symmetry.
We say that spin is some intrinsic quantum number. So if there is some kind of internal symmetry, then can we say that spin or spin is conserved?
No, spin is conserved as long as Lorentz invariance is unbroken. Okay, not spin. The spin itself is not conserved. The total angular momentum is conserved, right?
Yes.
So spin can be converted to orbital angular momentum.
Okay.
So spin by itself is not conserved because it's not related to an internal symmetry. See, there is no conserved current which there is no symmetry that tells us that this is by itself a conserved quantity, right?
Okay, but how can you transform the spin into some orbital angular momentum? Because orbital angular momentum has some algebraic representation that depend on x and t, but I think for spin there is no this kind of representation. We have to represent spin in terms of matrix or that kind of thing. So how can you transform the spin in angular
you
momentum?
can have, for example, a spin up state flipped into spin down.
Okay.
Transfer the balance to an orbital angular momentum.
Okay, yeah, for the conserved quantity, I mean the final number or scalar, this is true. This
Yes.
we can do for the conserved, but for the expression, probably we can do this. The measurable quantity is true, that we will get the total value of spin plus angular part is conserved.
Yes.
But in case of expression,
yeah, so the expression is of course this one, right? We are not saying that you are going to transform this expression into this one.
Okay.
So when you're talking about conservation law, right? The question is whether if you had just taken this, is this conserved by itself? Okay. And the answer is no. It's not in general conserved by itself.
No. Yes,
Right?
that's
It's
true.
based on Lorentz symmetry. Even though in some particular theories it may be conserved, right? Particularly in free theories nothing really happens, right? Particles, all properties of the particles are preserved.
Okay.
So there everything is conserved. But once you introduce interactions, and if the theory is Lorentz invariant, then you can say that the total angular momentum is conserved, but not spins or orbital angular momentum by itself. Because you can have a situation where you have a set of spin up particles which become spin down, and the excess is transferred to orbital angular momentum.
Yeah. Okay, that's true. That's true. Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other question? Okay, so then we'll stop here and we'll meet again on Thursday.
So, sir, one more last question, sir.
Okay, yeah.
So, what will fix the value of the spin, sir? Like here, it is just the spin angular momentum part, but what will define the, like, it's a spin 1 or spin half?
Oh, that's the matrix S, right? See, what will define is that you start with a Lagrangian. So suppose somebody gives a Lagrangian, okay? Then you have to do a hard work to figure out what your S is, okay? Because you want to demand that you have to find what the S's are, okay? Because you want the Lagrangian to be invariant, right?
Yes, yes.
So that S controls what the spin is. Right? See, once you have determined S, okay, then you can determine the T by looking at the infinitesimal transformation.
Yes.
It was defined here. Okay. And once you have
Yes.
found T, okay, we can find the sigmas.
Yes.
So what defines spin, okay, is the way the field appears in the Lagrangian, okay, because that dictates how it should transform under Lorentz transformation. and that in turn dictates what the spin is.
Okay, sir.
Any
Sir?
other question?
Sir,
Yes.
so just a follow up of this question.
Okay.
Does this sigma will act as an operator on the state kit?
No, so sigmas are just numbers.
Sigma
Right?
just numbers, yes.
Yeah. So these are just numbers. Okay. The operators will be these phi's. Right? In this final expression,
field
there are
operators.
phi here and then the phi's here. Phi's and phi's. Those will be the operators that acts on the Kate states.
Okay, okay. Okay.
But what particular combination of those operators you have, that is dictated by sigma. That's why different sigmas give different operators. Even though sigmas themselves are just numbers.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other question?
So,
Okay, so
can,
yes.
so can we also quantize this field also? Can we quantize this field also?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we'll quantize this field. I mean, that's the goal, right? I mean, you have already, for Klein-Gordon, for example, we know how to quantize it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And we'll quantize Maxwell field.
Okay, sir.
So certainly, I mean, the goal of quantum field theory will be to eventually quantize all these fields, right? And then this will become an operator,
Okay.
which will act on the states and pick up appropriate eigenvalues, and that will give you the spin and quantum number.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, so I'm now stopping.